Elon Musk releases the Twitter files. The U.S. Supreme Court blocks President Biden's student loan forgiveness program, and some senators withhold support until they vote on ending the military vaccine mandate. Washington insider Armstrong Williams joining us now with more on these headlines hitting Capitol Hill. Good morning to you, Armstrong. Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. You tweeted a six-parter on Elon Musk releasing information that you wrote showed Twitter concealed information that could have been detrimental to the Democratic Party. First of all, what did you make of those documents that were released?
You know, I was stunned. I would have assumed that the White House and Congress was influencing Twitter, and they were not. These social media companies have unprecedented, massive power influence over the American public. And it's plainly that what we've done now, Jen, is that we've entrusted the world's public square to a small group of private, easily influenced kids and prejudiced decision makers. And unfortunately, this is what Twitter has become. And even within Twitter, the documents reveal they knew that what they were doing was wrong, that their information was not reliable and was not conclusive, but they did not care. And the other thing is that you learn from this, 98% of them vote for Democrats.
Yeah, and in this situation, Musk voluntarily gave this up. But you wrote, imagine the revelations if social media companies were compelled to disclose their internal communications for decision making. Should a private company, Armstrong, be compelled to do so?
It is important that legislation that's often before Congress, 230, is passed, and these social media companies are treated just like broadcast companies and legitimate media companies around in this country. If nothing else comes from this, Jan, you've got to hope that social media companies will cave to the demands of transparency by the public and sort of build that trust and credibility back, because many people don't trust them, and many of the individuals have just been shut down on these social media platforms are going against the grain and exercising their freedom of speech. And most times when you come full circle, they have been right in their assessment, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's COVID, and a lot of these other issues that we've been facing.
Another big story we're following right now. The Supreme Court did block President Biden's student loan transfer program for now. The justices did agree to hear oral arguments in the case in February with a decision expected by June. How do you think the Supreme Court, Armstrong, will ultimately rule? And if this proposal did go through, let's talk about the impact you think it's going to have on the economy.
Well, it's not going to have an impact on the economy, Jan, because it's not going through. I mean, in the early stages of this, when Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Brown was sent it back to the lower courts finally got it right. They withheld that the president really did not have the power. This is something that must come from the legislative branch of government. Even Nancy Pelosi said a year ago that Biden had no control and no authority to forgive student loan debt. It was sort of like a bribe, Jed. He knew exactly what the outcome would be. He wanted to end up at the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court ruled that he does not have the power, so he can further malign the Supreme Court in his agenda to try to change the Supreme Court, which we don't hear much about, knowing that there's the credibility of the court will suffer. And these young people are naive enough to believe that Biden had the power to try to forgive their the student loan forgiveness, and he never had it. It's just politics that probably worked for him in Pennsylvania in the election. It may work for him in Georgia, because large amounts of young people are coming out to vote. And if you look at the exit voting in the early voting, it's all because of the student loan forgiveness program, which is not going to happen.
Some lawmakers demanding an end to the military's mandatory vaccine policy, and they're doing so by withholding support for defense funding. We saw this mandate die in the private sector. Why do you think the government's not doing the same?
You know what? I must tell you, if there's one silver lining in the recent election for many Americans, is that the House controls the purse string. And the House, when you, in your package just now with Kevin McCarthy saying he spoke with the defense secretary last night, it was not that he spoke to him. They told him what the new order would be and that they must end this vaccination mandate, because, I mean, enrollment and recruitment for the military is down dramatically, Jane. It's having such a huge impact. People who serve this country are losing their way of life. There's a new sheriff in town, and I can tell you this is something that will end quickly.
In the meantime, China is trying to signal they are attempting to soften their zero COVID policy amidst all these protests across their country, although we have seen video of them forcibly, reportedly removing a man from his own apartment. I don't know if you saw that video earlier. Trying to remove a man from his apartment because he came into contact with somebody with COVID and refused to go to one of these quarantine centers. So what's your thoughts about this? China right now, the only country forcing these lockdowns to try and do what they can, they say, to control COVID. What do you think about the White House's response so far? And what would an ease in restrictions look like anyway in China?
You know, the only check and balance with China's draconian policies is people. Protests, they're willing to demand the resignation of Xi Jinping. The Biden administration and no one else has little or no influence or impact what China does. I mean, Biden has his own issues with China, and he's absolutely compromised. And so the fact that they're easing or talking this, though it doesn't mean anything, because while they're talking this, they're still arresting and beating people on the street. At least it shows that there are growing voices in China, like they are in Iran, where another generation is rising up, challenging in power, even if it costs them their freedom by jail time, and sometimes it costs them their lives and their safety and the safety of their family.
Yeah, and we're seeing
it's the power of the people.
It is, but we're seeing some of the danger happening right now there in China as a result of this as well. Armstrong Williams, we appreciate you joining us this morning here on the National Desk. Have a good week.
Thank you, Jan. Same to you.
Thank you.